What is going on, everybody? So today's film I'm going to be talking about is one that I've been really looking forward to watching for a very long time. And the reason being is I feel like in the scope of film lovers, there's always series of films or directors or studios that everyone talks about, like, hey, you have to watch all of the movies. And Studio Ghibli is talked about quite frequently because of just how incredible their animation is, their storytelling is. And throughout my life, I've always wanted to watch all of the Studio Ghibli movies, but for some reason have just never sat down and taken the time to watch all of the films. I had seen Ponyo when it was released in the theater. That was my only exposure to Studio Ghibli films. And a few years ago, I sat down and watched Spirited Away. And both films, I was blown away by the animation and the worlds, but for some reason I just never sat down and watched the remainder of those. Well, recently HBO Max, or Max, whatever it's called now, has gotten most of Ghibli's films, and so I've had the ability to sit down and watch some more of them. And so the first film that I sat down and watched was Howl's Moving Castle, and I look forward to talking about it today. Howl's Moving Castle is directed by Hayao Miyazaki. When Sophie, a shy young woman, is cursed with an old body by a spiteful witch, her only chance of breaking the spell lies with a self-indulgent yet insecure young wizard and his companions in his legged walking castle. So I had no idea what to expect with this movie. I haven't even seen a trailer for these. When it comes to Ghibli, I like to go in as open-minded and as blind as possible, other than the merchandise I've seen for the movies over the years. And this film was a masterpiece. That's really the only way that I can describe it. Truly one of the most enthralling and beautiful stories that I've ever seen, especially in the animation medium. I think of all Miyazaki's films that I've watched thus far, I'd have to rewatch Spirited Away and Ponyo, but this is probably my favorite that I've seen so far. And I think that all boils down to just how immersive the world is and how incredible the character writing is in this movie. So as the film states, you're introduced to Sophie, who is a young girl that works at a hat shop where her mother's at. She's there, she's kind of living her life. Nothing super interesting happens on a day-to-day basis, and you're kind of just thrown in to this wild story of these countries that are at war with each other, and the leader of the country wants all the wizards to come fight for them for this cause of war. A lot of the people in the community are talking about how senseless and useless the war is, but if you don't comply, what could happen to you otherwise? And so she's out one day going into the city, and she runs into Howl, and Howl ends up helping her get from one point to another in the city. They have this brief interaction. It's really kind of jarring how quickly it just jumps you into it. She ends up going back to the hat shop, and she's in there, and there's a knock on the door in the evening, and you're introduced to the Witch of the Waste, who is a woman obsessed with Howl, and because I believe she saw the interaction between the two of them and the jealousy kind of hits her, she plagues Sophie with a curse that turns her into an old woman. Well, she gets up and she realizes she can't interact with her mother or anyone. They won't believe what happened, so she ends up trying to go hunt down Howl's castle to see if she can find some kind of solution. Well, she gets to Howl's castle, and she's introduced to Calcifer, who is a flame demon that essentially powers the entire castle. Markle, who is a young boy that lives at the castle as well, that helps Howl with his day-to-day duties, and a scarecrow that Sophie refers to as Turnip Head. And the movie sort of follows their adventures, and Howl isn't sure who Sophie is when she runs into her again. He's not 100% sure that he recognizes her, and the movie is Sophie hopefully figuring out a cure for her old age, while also trying to help Howl navigate his own life and navigate his life and what he's going to do when it comes to this war. And this movie is just absolutely astounding. It's hard to even put into words just how absolutely amazing this is. The animation is bar none some of the most beautiful I've ever seen. The design of the castle, it has its own personality in a way that is just so uniquely Miyazaki. Like the way he designs characters and the way that he designs worlds is just unlike anything I've ever seen before in my life. And I love the way that these characters are written. And one of the things I really like about these movies is that even the villains, it seems like in the Ghibli movies I've watched, aren't 100% villainized in one way or another. They're so multi-layered when it comes to their personalities that there's moments that you really like them, and then they'll do something really stupid or that hurts the group of people, and it kind of shifts your perspective again. And I think it says a lot about Miyazaki as a person that he writes characters that are so multi-layered, because human beings are never just one thing, right? Even if they do bad things, that doesn't necessarily make a person evil. There's obviously exceptions to that rule. There are people in this world who have been incredibly evil, but I do think the way Miyazaki presents that information is really interesting. And then obviously it's clear that a lot of his films are heavily reliant on thinking about World War II and what Japan had to go through during World War II, and being someone who can see that the actions of his country are not something that he condoned during that time period. And it's just a really fascinating exploration into a lot of elements of war, especially for a country that saw horrific ramifications of war, with the amount of people that were killed there and the amount of atrocities that they had to witness. And I think showing war through the perspective of this, of like forcing people to become involved in all of the like conspiracies that are surrounding it, the way that the military is painted as like you're introduced to two soldiers at the beginning that are just like appear to be some of the most scummy and awful people in the world, and it really gives you that feeling of exactly how Miyazaki feels about war. And that's a theme that I feel like has occurred through every single one of his films that I have seen thus far, is that there's elements of that and the tension that existed because of that. And so I like thinking about that in the back of my mind as well. But aside from that, there's like a charm level to these movies that is just through the roof. While you're watching it, your heart just feels so full because of how amazing the dialogue is between these characters. And obviously this film has a possible romance that blossoms throughout between Sophie and Howl's characters, and that Sophie is trying to help Howl realize who he can be and that he doesn't have to be this monster that everyone portrays him as. And I think that that's a really great exploration of ideas too. And I love that Miyazaki always seems to write really great female characters as his leads that I've seen thus far, between this and Spirited Away. And Ponyo had some great female characters as well, which is really cool to watch in these movies. And I think Howls was way ahead of its time as far as in the animation medium, and obviously his other works I'm sure are exactly the same. But this was a movie that I had a smile on my face the entire runtime of the film. I was blown away by one thing after the other after the other. I think all the vocal performances in this thing are absolutely fantastic. The score to this is absolutely beautiful, and it accompanies that world so well. And this movie could have been 5 hours long, and I never would have wanted it to end. Truly one of the most beautiful animated films I've ever seen, and I can't wait to hop on HBO Max and watch more Ghibli films, because obviously Miyazaki is at the forefront of Ghibli, but there's a lot of other directors that have worked with him, and it just seems like one of the best animation studios to ever exist. And I recommend this movie wholeheartedly. There is not a single flaw that I would attribute to this film whatsoever. I loved it completely. So have you seen Howl's Moving Castle? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. I thought this movie was a masterpiece. I loved every second of this thing. I thought it was so well put together, so well structured, and I cannot wait to watch more Ghibli films. As always, if you like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.